Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that helps improve your marketable skill set. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, February 21st, and welcome to episode number 56, Pros and Cons of Using Early Decision to Apply. In this week's news, 10 college majors with the biggest gender gap. And we're in chapter 56 of 171 answers, and we're talking through the pros and cons of applying to college through the early decision application process. And it's that time again this week for bonus content. And get ready for part 2 of Mark's interview with Dr. David Williams. So you want to be a doctor or a nurse? What you need to know.
Friends, you may remember last week I talked to you about this legacy project out of Cornell University, where 1,500 65-year-olds were interviewed about their 8 biggest regrets in life. And so in our intro here, we're kind of walking down these 8 so that we can learn from others without having to hit our noggin up against the head, or without having to hit our head.
You hit your noggin today, Mark?
Yeah, hit our noggin against the wall, the concrete wall, and learn the hard way. So I'm just, because Anika doesn't know what these are, so this is all extemporaneous. So last week, number 8 was taking care of the body, your body. And number 7, and I want to get some commentary from Anika on this one, not taking enough risks with your career choices.
Ooh.
Commentary, please.
Are you telling me I'm doing that?
No. Why are you thinking I'm accusing you? You did that last time. I said taking care of the body, and you were like, you taking care of the body? This is the survey. You're speaking for
in my feelings.
I'm not personalizing it to you. This is the survey. Unless you were 65 and in the survey, then don't be so personal.
Good point. Okay, good to know. Yeah, I mean, just that. All of that. Like, you got to take risks in anything in life. How about that? Forget just a career.
Well, I think a lot of times people look back and they're like, I stayed stuck in that job and I always wanted to be, it could be anything, right? I always wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to go back to school and be a nurse, or I should have started that bakery. And, that's the kind of thing I think they're talking about. So I thought that was a good one. And so let's learn and not make that mistake, because you don't want to be in the survey at 65 saying the same thing. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, this week's news. This is a blog article written by Miss Katie Bardaro. And
you're getting good with the names. That was good.
I am.
Of course, I wouldn't know if you were wrong. It's not like I met her.
Right.
Maybe both wrong.
Easily we'll find an email from her tomorrow saying, you were actually wrong.
Maybe a phone call.
So Katie. So Katie wrote about 10 college majors with the biggest, largest, all the same, right? Gender gap. And it's written on the pay scale website. And so while most attention turns toward the lack of women in STEM fields, many majors overwhelmingly experience gender imbalance. And that is true. I thought about that. It's like it's always about girls in STEM. There's a huge push for that, right? So Katie, she dives in pretty quickly, Mark, and she goes in to highlight these careers. But I do want to make this one point, which I thought was interesting, is that we're still dealing with these societal standards around, dictating to us how society thinks that men and women should act. We're still caught up in that. So women are the caretakers and the guys are the tough-minded ones. And, that's just what we do and how we're born and bred, whatever. So again, Katie just dives in, she starts with fashion. Who do you think is leading? What do you think, Mark? The gender imbalance is in fashion.
But it wasn't just that. For all 10 of these, I think we should blow through them really quickly. That's the percentage. So for fashion, it's 95%, which is basically 19 out of 20. That's still high.
Yeah, true that. And then she went, okay, so that's the first one. Construction management. Of course, men make up 93% of the construction management degree programs. She goes on to mechanical engineering. Ooh, not a shocker. Man, again, 92% of all majors are on the masculine.
So I have a question for you.
Uh-huh.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Were you surprised it was 92%?
Actually, I was, honestly.
So was I.
Yeah,
so was I.
I really was. Because I'm like, the 1% of women, because again, hence the big major push. Now, I would like to think that we've made some strides. I mean, that's still not, doesn't put a dent in anything, but I'm hopeful that.
I mean, I've been using. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I've been using the stat for a while that 82% of students in engineering schools are men and only 18% are women.
Mm-hmm.
But this was not 82. This is 92.
Right.
Still,
right.
82 was bad enough,
Right. So wait, Mark, I'm sorry. I was thinking the opposite. I was thinking that the number would be higher than that. I thought it would be like 97% of mechanical
Really?
engineers. Yeah.
So you thought only 3% of mechanical engineers were women?
Yeah.
Oh wow! I thought it would be.
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't down to the numerical science around it, but that would not have been surprising to me at all. I expected the number to be. I mean, because again, that women in STEM push is huge, and for a reason.
I guess the reason why this surprises me is I have worked with so many women going into engineering. I really have a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
So my experience belies these numbers, but I believe them.
Okay.
This is credible. Pay scales are reputable. Let's keep humming. Number 4.
Okay, number 4 is electrical engineering. 91% makes up from the men. Interior design. Interior design.
Guess who that one is?
The female persuasion. But just at 90%. So that
doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. Because like almost all the people I know that want to do interior design are women.
Okay.
I will say that.
Okay, so then she jumps on the number 6, which is physics. And what is her percentage here? It's only
89.
89%. Yeah, 89% male persuasion. Social work and nursing. I will say, I guess this was a little bit of surprise because, I'm not going to even say that, but she puts this at 88% of women dominating the social work and nursing fields. And
when I get a guy going into those fields, I get excited. Like, wow, a guy in social work, a guy in nursing.
Right. Okay. And then so number 8, aerospace engineering, 87% of the male persuasion. Occupational therapy. She puts that at 80% of women. 86% of women. Filling those majors.
Yeah, and it actually says NPR notes that 90% are in the professional field right now, but 86% are majors in college. So I guess it's slight improvement from 90 currently doing it to 86.
And then the final 10th one is civil engineering. Well, civil engineering and computer science. That was lower than I expected. It says 85% male dominated. I expected that number to be higher for sure. So that's good news. I think not great news, but okay news.
So now I'm going to play like I'm you. What are the takeaways from this, Anika? What are your takeaways?
The takeaways are that there's so much opportunity for the opposite sex.
Bingo.
So much opportunity.
And the thing, it's like, the same thing. You've heard me say this a million times in this podcast when it comes to colleges. Colleges want what they don't have, right?
Right.
And that's the same thing, like for companies, like diversity. There's lots of advantages to that.
Yep.
There's times when organizations just need that opposite perspective. It's not just, we want to be able to have that thought process around the decision-making table to think the way the woman or the man does. There's just practical things. I mean, you could be doing occupational therapy and a guy could be more comfortable with the guy or nurse. I mean, there's lots of different reasons we could go down the line for that. But so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to take this article, because opportunities abound. And I see it, right? Like, it's funny. I just got an email about an hour before we came on here, Anika. In fact, let me see if I can pull this up. All right. Literally. So Anika and I are recording right now, and it is 9:45 p.m. So this email comes across my email at 8:16 p.m. So that's an hour and a half ago. What is it? Georgia Tech Society of Women Engineers presents Engineering Day for Women, March 10th, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And we could go on and on and on about different schools. Like, you see them recruiting. Just to stick with Georgia Tech for an example, they actually have, you can go on their website, they have like a director of like women recruiting. You don't see that a lot, right? Okay. And other schools are like that as well. I mean, if you take a look at WPI, Worcester Polytech Institute, fantastic engineering school in Worcester, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. They diverted $1 million. They got a new women president, and her goal was to bring, it's an engineering school, and their goal was to bring it to school, to pretty much get 50-50 in gender. And so when she came in, it was pretty close to 70-30. And she's pretty much moved it to 60-40. Oh, wow. In a few years. But you know what they did? They took $1 million that they just were leaving in the kitty for times when they had to readjust somebody's aid award. Like somebody appealed and they realized they needed to give them more money, or financial situations, that were unexpected caused allocation of funds. They took $1 million from that fund and allocated it toward recruiting women engineers. So that means all kinds of fly-in programs and camps and director of women recruiting. And so one of the big points is opportunities abound if you're willing to be the other gender, which is why we selected this article. That's right. Any other takeaways?
No, let's let that be the one.
I think there's one other one. Okay. I think that you should be aware of the fact that, you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to be in either a very male-dominated profession or a female-dominated profession. Not everybody may be socially up for that. This may sound trite, but it's not a joke. It's something you have to think about. I mean, I loved admissions. I would even go so far as to say I was an admissions junkie. I mean, admissions or college coaching has not felt like work to me more than 99% of the time. But I'm going to be extremely transparent with our listening friends. When I did boarding school admissions, we had 9 people in our admissions office, including our administrative staff. And there was a 2-year period when we had 7 women and 2 dudes, including me. And for a while, it was 8 women and just me. And I'm going to be honest, it was rough socially. I'm generally like a real talker at social events, especially one-on-one. But when we would go out as a staff for dinner or have a birthday celebration at a home, sometimes the others on the team would say, "Mark, why are you so quiet?" And it was because it was so socially maladroit. I don't mean to be stereotypical, but there's only so much talk about baby showers and wedding dresses and getting your hair done that I could take. So being one of the only employees from your gender is something that's not easy. You have to really think about if it's the social environment you want. Of course, some jobs are more social than others, and some have more office politics than others as well. But it's just something to think about. I think you need to be, right. You need to be, right. And Nick, I was going to say it there. Well, my mind sometimes is just not in the right place. I was thinking, you know where I'm going, don't you? It might be good for the dating life. Oh, should I delete that or leave it in?
No, that's truth. Facts.
Oh, this is not the MRS degree plan or the Mr. degree plan.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
So our first-time listeners, I wrote a book. It's called 171 Answers. The subtitle is To the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And the book has 171 chapters and 691 pages. It's a reference book. You basically go to the table of contents. You see what questions are there, and then you jump right to whatever, page 451, if that's the question that you have. And so what we do in this part of the podcast is we go chapter by chapter through the book. And our episode numbers correspond with the chapter number. So chapter 56, episode 56. And today's chapter / episode is Anika, da 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 da. What's
The pros and cons of early
okay?
decision. It's all about
Yes.
that ED.
So take it away. You've read the chapter. Why don't you extract a couple nuggets from what you read and tell me what you think?
Well, I felt a little comfy wumpy in this one because, Jalen went through the early decision
Mm-hmm.
2 process. So I was very familiar with the
Mm-hmm.
pros of it. Also the cons, but our pros
Mm-hmm.
outweigh the cons easily. At
Mm-hmm.
Davidson College. So the first one is that the acceptance
Mm-hmm.
rates are higher. And I knew that because it was another school Jalen wanted to go. Well, he's been considering for a long, long time, and they basically told him if you don't apply early decision, then maybe not,
You want
because they wanted to lock him in.
So you brought this up a few times. You want to
Yeah.
mention the school? You don't have to be all clandestine. It's not that. It's not like it's
Oh, I guess
secret.
I have talked about that
Yeah,
before, right?
tell about
It's Duke.
Duke
Duke.
University.
Yeah, he's a Dookie. Javon's a
Uh-huh.
Dookie. They've been talking about Duke since Jalen was born, probably while he was in the womb.
Mm-hmm.
And he went there. They loved him. He didn't love them as much as he thought he
Mm-hmm.
was,
I
which
remember
was
that.
so interesting. But yeah, but it came down to that. They were like, we really need to know that you want to be here. And he really did not. So he didn't apply through the early decision process. But we got to stick with the
Yep.
pros. I don't want to jump to the
Yep.
cons
Yep.
yet.
Yep.
So the second one, which we know as well, is that you find out earlier. And I can't remember the length of time, but you stayed in the chapters about 4.5 months earlier than the regular round. So it makes you less stressed. You're in there, you're done. Like the kids are coasting. Well, I shouldn't say coasting because you still got to keep your grades up. Remember that, students. You remember that's important. But the stress is definitely gone because you know very early on that you've been accepted. And what does that mean? You saving yourself some bucks on all those other application fees and all that good stuff that you'll be spending on all these other schools, because now you're done. You're locked into the school. So the financial piece of applying stops at that point. Now, the cons, the biggest one, Mark, is the comparison of the financial aid packages. And the second one that you cite kind of shocked me because I know you've talked about this before, but it wasn't on the brain, that kids don't always do their homework when they're looking at these schools, and they say, oh, early decision. Oh yeah, I'll go ahead and apply and I'll go ahead and lock myself in, even though I've never visited or I don't know much really about the culture. And that's the con of it. So not only if it's a kid that doesn't know anything about the school, okay, now you're done, you're locked in there, like you're binded into that agreement, into that institution. But the fact that you don't even know anything about the money as well, because school Z might have given you $15,000 more than the school that you locked into. So those are the definite cons when it comes to locking yourself in. So, but what you think?
No, every single thing you said was correct. I'll add a couple more points and a couple more stories too. So, as far as making you a more competitive applicant, I mean, the statistics are just crystal clear. And now sometimes it's true that a lot of athletes and legacy kids are steered into ED to lock themselves in. But there's no doubt about the fact that it increases your chances. So that's obviously a pro. If there's a particular school you really want to get into, but you've touched on that. I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna take a pause here because this is important. Why would it increase your chances of getting in? Let me ask you that, and then I'll move on to some other things.
Because you said you love them and no one else. Like, it's because you are totally committed to it. It helps their planning. Let me back up a little bit because you reminded me of that. Like, just think about it. Okay, I know what I'm dealing with now. I'm an institution now. I know how many kids I have now. I know what to plan for to fill these other seats. So it's a business aspect of it.
Yeah. Just to go in a little more depth on that. So it's a real Herculean task to fill a class. It really is. You have so many constituencies you have to keep happy. Just think about it for a sec. Like, if you don't bring in really smart kids, the faculty is not going to be happy with you, right? If you don't bring in some heavy donor hitters, the development office isn't going to be happy with you. If you stiff all the alumni office isn't going to be happy with you. If your incoming school profile shows that you're taking less academically oriented kids, unfortunately, people do still judge that by the numbers like GPA and testing, then a lot of people are going to be upset. Faculty and alumni say, oh, you're declining. If you don't bring in a lot of diversity, now think about all that diversity. That's lots of things, right? People are nowadays watching your Pell Grant numbers, so that's socioeconomic diversity. If you had like 41 states before and you go down to 36, people are going to be like, "What's going on? Are we losing our national appeal?" So you got to look at your states. You're trying to have the international appeal. Okay, then you got to have gender diversity, and so then rural kids. I almost forgot about race and ethnic diversity. And you can't just get away with generically grouping everybody as a student of color. People are comparing the Black kids and the Latino kids and the Asian kids, and in some cases even the Native American kids, to whom matriculated to the college the previous year. Students, parents, school officials, the media, and others are looking closely at how racially diverse the incoming class is. So there's all of that on the diversity side. Then athletes, it's not just athletes, coaches, if you don't bring in those kids, it's down to the exact position. Like if you need a running back, you need a running back. If you need a spiker volleyball, so it's like down to, and the same is true for your orchestra. Okay, so it's like down to, so then let's talk about two other extremes. If you under-enroll almost every school, there's such a small percentage of schools that are relying on endowment. Pretty much all schools are heavily dependent on tuition. So you under-enroll, now what? Millions of dollars in the budget isn't there. So now what? Faculty get laid off, majors get dropped, maybe even departments get shrunk. I mean, all kinds of things. Staff gets cut, so you can't under-enroll. Oh, you get fired, by the way. That's not fun. You over enroll, and we did a whole podcast really early on, Anika, how UC Irvine over enrolled 700 kids. Remember that? And
I
all
do.
all the fallout. So we won't rehash that. So either one of those is a problem. So I call it like getting the frame of your puzzle together. Like you got to get it down. And I'll tell you what, I was talking to an admission counselor about 3 days ago because I do counselor calls with schools. And I was following up, talking about students that are applying. And the representative said to me, we did exceptionally well in ED1. We really did well. The kids that we admitted enrolled. So ED2, we're going to be a lot more selective. And that's one thing people don't realize. The second round of early decision is more competitive. Why? Because they've already got a lot of the kids in those slots. So part of it is that piece, right? It's, okay, it ensures that I can have a balanced class and we can meet and our fulfillment to our institutional interests or our institutional priorities. Because every school has institutional interests and institutional priorities.
Right.
This week, Nika, I went out and had an amazing time. It was just 2 days ago and heard 6 deans of admission all talk. University of Texas, University of Virginia, Washington and Lee, Emory, Georgia Tech, and SMU, all there. And a great statement was made by one of the deans. He said, you know what? Admissions boils down to 2 things: supply and demand and institutional interest. That was profound. So that's that component. And then there's a couple other things. One is you want the cheerleader, you want the enthusiast on your campus. You don't want the kid sulking. You don't want the downcast and distressed they didn't get in another school, right? You want the cheerleader wearing the shirt. Like, that's good energy. So you want to bring in the enthusiast. So it's good for like that esprit de corps, the energy, and it's good for your planning. And then the last thing is these highly competitive schools, they're trying to have lower acceptance rates every year. They just are, because scarcity is attractive to, I know it's sad because this is part of the stress of the business. Scarcity appeals to people. So they're very conscious. If they accept it 17%, they don't want to accept 24% the next year. So what does that mean? They don't want to waste acceptances on people that are not coming. So I know it took a lot of time on this, but that's important. Anika, you mentioned the business side, and I'm not sure if you realize just how profound that was. Here's another aspect of the business side that we haven't discussed yet. If you take most of your applicants and you lock them in early, this leaves not very many spots for students who apply in the regular round. And keep in mind, there are always a lot more people who apply in the regular round, therefore making it harder to get in when most of the students apply. This is a strategy some schools use to get their acceptance rates lower and to create buzz about how hard they are to get into because they are so coveted. You know what? I think an example probably will help here. So let's say you own a movie theater and you want to create some buzz about this hot new movie. Let's say the theater you own holds 300 seats. And let's say on average, about 150 people will reserve their seats in advance. But let's say as many as 1,000 try to come to the theater at the day of the movie to get in. Well, if you give 150 seats away early, now there are only 150 seats left on the day of the movie. And remember, 1,000 people try to come on the day of the movie. So now you have 1,000 people standing in line for only 150 of the 300 seats. So now you have long lines and difficulty getting in. And this creates buzz both with the population at large and also with the media. What is going on over there at this movie theater, or in the case of admissions, at this school that's made it so hard to get in? Let me give you an example. Colorado College had almost a 30% acceptance rate in the early decision round, and they took over 60% of their class in the ED round. Let me repeat that, over 60% in the early round. Remember, most applicants apply in the regular round, just like the movie example. And many admission directors will tell you that applicants are just as strong, if not stronger, in the regular round. So now they have all of these applicants for such few spots. So Colorado College took only 5%, that's right, 1 in 20 of the students in the regular round. These are Harvard and Stanford type numbers. So scarcity drives buzz. And this is another aspect of the business side, Anika. So I think you were actually even more profound than you realized when you said there's the business side. Also, senior year stress. I just talked to one of my seniors who's NED, and I talked to her mom. She said, my child is enjoying her senior year. And I talked to the student. She said, my classmates are stressed. One thing you didn't mention, Anika, is it can help you to transition. So if you know by December 15th, I'm going to be living in Portland, Oregon, you can like kind of start to wrap your mind around like the planning, right? Like, okay, let's go up there. Let's look at the town. You know what I mean? Let's meet the people. You can start to do your planning. And this is a big one. With certain very generous schools, you can actually get a better aid package, right? Because some of the schools that practice ED, most of the ones, are some of the hardest schools to get into, and they're also some of the most generous schools. So that's that. Disadvantages. So you mentioned a big one, right? You can't compare your aid offers. That's a big one. You don't get a chance to, if you haven't thoroughly done your research, then you may not have kicked all the tires and done what I call an MRI on both the college and yourself. A couple others is if you apply ED to the wrong school, you can actually get a worse financial aid package. So it's tricky. It can be good for you financially, or it can be bad for you financially. And then another thing is if you get denied just before Christmas, that can be painful. And are you able to handle that? Some people can handle that a lot better. So those are the thoughts. Anything else you want to share on ED?
No, but you reminded me. My brain stuck on the financial aid package and being locked into something terrible. Again, this is where we talk about the net price calculators and really digging down deep and understanding what they're going to give you. And is that the case that you do actually know in advance of the signing the contract that you know how much they're giving you, or do you don't have to wait on that, do you?
So it's tricky because the way the AD contracts are written is they ask you if you get in to withdraw your applications everywhere else. Okay, a counselor, your college counselor signs that. You sign that. The parent signs that. So they're really trying to put teeth into it, but they're not throwing you to jail if you get out of it. So if I'm working with a student and they get an ED offer and they're in and they're still a little leery of the money, I will encourage them not to withdraw their applications until they actually see the aid package.
Okay.
And the net price calculator is a great way. Everybody should do it. But you know what makes it more tricky than that, Anika? Some net price calculators are amazing and some are abysmal.
You've said that. Yep.
Yeah. So you have to know who's got a good net price calculator. And that's another subject for another day. If we start going there, we'll be doing like what? It's like 10 now. We'll be like 3 a.m. And I know you're not a night person. You'll be snoring on me.
Yes, I would.
No, we can't talk about net price calculators now. I think that's probably a good enough, ED conversation for now. And
Yep.
if anybody else has questions, send us emails.
Yep. Do that homework.
But I'll say one more thing. When I'm working with a family, this is one of the most delicate decisions they make, is whether to go ED or not. Because it's like there's so many layers to it, right? And one thing I hate is when someone says, I'm going ED, because they hear that it's easier to get an ED, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a common thing that we hear as counselors. I'm going ED, I just don't know where. Yeah, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So why do you think I wouldn't like that, Anika?
Well, clearly they haven't done their homework. Like, I'm going ED to what? That just doesn't make sense.
You know what I say to someone when they say that? I get really direct. I say that's like saying, I'm getting married at 21. I just don't know to who yet.
You in these relationships.
Let's get off of here. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, this week it is time for our bonus content. And Mark, you, clearly you, want to talk about why it's hard to get in some of these highly selective schools. And Mark, you're going to reveal to us through statistics how the statistics reveal the truth of why this is happening. Why is it happening, Mark? Give us some numbers.
Yeah, so those of you who are longtime friends of our show, you may remember us saying, like, Anika's like a sound snob. Like, the sound's got to be perfect. Or she'll like, Mark, let's redo the whole episode. The sound's not good enough. So I'm kind of a stat snob. I'm really into numbers. So if I get too crazy with the numbers, slap me across the face. Now, I say that metaphorically. I had one of our longtime listeners the other day say, Anika's not right beside you when you do these podcasts? I'm like, no. He's like 6 hours away. So your slap can't hurt me from Greensboro. All right.
I'll get at you.
All right. So I wanted to talk about this because something I've noticed, which is a lot of very good students are surprised when they don't get into schools they apply to, and their parents are surprised. And so they're kind of like, I don't understand. Like, I've got like 1490 on my SAT. I took really rigorous classes. I've got a 3.78 GPA. I've got extracurriculars. I think I wrote good essays. My teachers speak highly of me. I feel like I demonstrated interest. Like, why am I not getting in? And the parents feel the same way. And the answer is in the numbers. So let's just do a deep statistical dive at the numbers. So this is one of these questions I'm going to ask that's almost impossible, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So what do you think Rice University, MIT, Johns Hopkins, Dartmouth, Yale, and Princeton all have in common this year?
Low acceptance rates.
Well, you know what? You kind of got it, but you weren't specific enough because I said it was really hard. All right, so we'll give you a fudge on that. So the answer is they all accepted under 800 kids in the early round. Under 800 kids, all right? Now, Anika, take a guess how many high schools are in the country.
Ooh, let's say 35,000.
Ooh, that was good.
What?
That was good.
How many?
40,000.
How many?
40,000.
Look at that.
That was
Look
good.
at that.
So think about it. So if there's 40,000 schools in the country and 800, only less than 800 kids get in. And this is what I tell families when they're like surprised, and it actually helps them a lot. And that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because not everybody out there going through this is talking to me. So I know other people are experiencing this. If you do the math on 800 admits for 40,000 high schools, I'm not going to ask you to do the math because we had that before, had that conversation online. You're like, don't ask me to do math on the air. I remember that. Oh, I learned that lesson.
Not without prep. Not without prep.
All right. So what that means is one kid for every 50 high schools got into those schools early. Let me repeat that.
Wow.
1 student for every 50 high schools got into those schools early. Guess what? It's even worse than that in terms of your odds. You know why? Did I ask you how many high schools were in the world or in the United States?
United States, 40,000. Let's guess what the world is.
Yeah, guess what? These schools are not only taking American applicants. So most of these schools are about 10% international, and a school like Emory is 17% international. So if you factor that in, now your chances really go from 1 kid out of 50 to, even worse, 50 high schools.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worse than that. I'm not trying to depress everybody. I'm actually trying to encourage you so you don't feel bad if you don't get in. So
I feel encouraged. We would like to thank all of our amazing listeners for your comments, for sharing your stories, and for the tremendous feedback on how our episodes have impacted your lives. We are so humbled by you, and we are 100% committed to helping fill the void in education around the college admissions process. So now, to help offset some of the considerable production costs for the show, we are asking for your financial support.
We are very excited to introduce 2 very nominal levels of support that will allow us to remain commercial free and to meet the various expenses that it takes to produce this show. You can show your support by investing in either of our Sustainer gift level, which is only $5 per month, or the Enhancer gift level, which is only $10 a month. And if you would like to give a larger monthly gift or a one-time gift, you can absolutely do that as well.
So at our $5 a month Sustainer gift level, this is what you're going to get. We're going to recognize you for your support on our website, and you'll receive an invitation to participate in a private group video college presentation that will happen in the month of January. And we're going to mail you 2 beautiful Your College Bound Kid notebooks, one for you and one for your student. And for our $10 a month Enhancer gift level supporters, you're going to get all of that at the Sustainer plan level, in addition to a 30-minute private one-on-one video college session with Mark on any admissions topic that you would like to cover. And also an amazing opportunity for a 100-word shout out on the show to recognize the hard work of your student.
It's so easy to support the show. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and select Donate from our website menu. Again, we thank you so much for your support, and we deeply appreciate any and all gifts that will allow us to keep going commercial free.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. When you look, and we're going to have Susan Tree coming on pretty soon on our podcast, super excited about it. I worked with Susan for 9 years at Westtown. I regard her as providing a lot of my training. We used to talk about this all the time when the decisions would come back, and especially these kind of schools. And we would be like, you know what? So many of the spots are going to what we call hooked applicants. You know that is, Anika.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them go to athletes. So if you're not a recruited athlete, some of these schools, recruited athletes get over 30% of the spots.
Oh,
some
wow.
of the small schools. Yes. So by the time you take out recruited athletes, if you're not a recruited athlete, you can't even get that spot. That's just for somebody else that's good at that sport, right? International students, we won't go through all the hooks, but big donor daddy over here who's going to build the $50 million building, you're competing for less slots, not to mention other institutional priorities that schools have when it comes to things like gender and race and other institutional priorities. So in reality, not your chances may be more like out of every 100 schools, one kid could get in early. And so when you think, well, I think I've done everything, you have, and you're an amazing applicant. But are you that one kid out of every maybe 100 schools? Probably not. Like there are other talented people in the world too, right? So I've been sharing this with people, and it's actually been helping them because when they see the numbers, they realize, oh, it kind of makes a lot of sense. And here's another way of putting it, Anika. So let's go back to all those schools I mentioned. And I could have mentioned many others. I just picked schools that everybody knew their names and they had under 800 early admits. So there are 50 states in the country. So that 700 that we just said, by the time we take away all those groups, the athletes, the international, everything, right? Let's say there may be like 300 openings, honestly, at those schools. By the time you take away athletes, international students, alumni kids, if you're not that, underrepresented students of color that they want to make sure they're at least probably not called underrepresented for a reason. So you may not be at the numbers there in the country, but they want to have somebody there to represent. There may be 300 spots, if that, maybe 200. So let's just say 300. Well, actually, I'll say 300, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's 50 states in the country. So this is another thing I say to my families. That means on average, these schools are taking 6 kids per state early. 6 per state. So don't beat yourself up. And obviously there's that's averages, right? We know California and Wyoming are not the same. Like I get it, right? But it's averages. And so I don't want people to beat themselves up with that. And I'll just give you some more numbers. There are 19.9 million people in college right now. There were 15 million in 2000. So that's a lot more, almost 5 million more. 3.6 million people graduate from high school every year, and 70% of them go to college, most full-time, and most are going to 4-year over 2-year. Then you've got non-traditional students that are also going back to college. Okay? And so, it's just the numbers work against you at the most competitive schools, even if you're amazing. And so you should not be berating yourself. Now, let's say someone's thinking, okay, Mark, I heard all those schools you said. You gave me Duke, and you gave me Princeton, and you gave me Yale, and you gave me MIT. Those are all East Coast schools. What about the West Coast? Okay. So I'm going to read an article, Anika, and I've never read an article in a podcast, so I'm going to take a little time to read it. We could almost say this 2 in the news editions today. This is about the University of California, the UC system. All right? This is what it says. Great article by Emily Durai of the Mercury News in San Jose. Probably should have featured this in the news section, but you guys get a bonus one today. So here's what she says. 5 of the campuses at the UC system, University of California system, 5 of the campuses received more than 100,000 applications each, as students applied to more and more schools, some to more than 24 out of fear their top choices won't say yes. Quote, a lot of us are scared we're going to get rejected, said 17-year-old Melissa Berger of Hayward, who is applying to 12 schools, including 6 of the UCs. And that's typical amongst her friends. UC got 119,626 applications from high school seniors in California, and another 34,347 applications from students that transfer from California community colleges. So some states are really set up that have this really great symbiotic relationship with their community colleges. California is a big state like that, so they take lots of community college kids that transfer in. So if you're a high school senior, you're not getting those slots. They're going to the community college kid. The figures released Thursday by UC Office of the President showed a 5.7% increase overall in applications from last year, with each of the 9 campuses that educate undergraduates posting gains ranging from 4.6% at Berkeley to 12.4% at Riverside. The most popular campuses in terms of increased growth among California residents are UCLA, UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara. UC declined to make an official statement for this phone interview. But Stephen Handel, Associate Vice President of Undergraduate Admissions, said in a statement, marked increases in California applicants from throughout the state and from the range of backgrounds demonstrate the university's efforts to get the word out about the accessibility of the UC education, and they're clearly paying off. Yet many of the schools aren't particularly accessible to students anymore. After rising in 2016 by more than 15%, the number of in-state freshmen admitted for the fall dropped 1.7%. It is unclear what the admission rate will be for next fall, but the in-state rate for students at UC Berkeley in 2017 was 19.7%. At UCLA, just 14.6%, well below the 23.3% admission rate for out-of-state students. Enrollment is not keeping pace with applications now, said Wei Lu Sun, a UC Berkeley graduate who helps students apply for admission to UC. There's not enough room for students. Soon said some of the students she advised now applied to as many as 25 schools to try to maximize their chances of getting into the highly ranked university. And with the UCs becoming increasingly competitive, some ultimately choose to go out of state, lured by good scholarships and the promise of admission to competitive majors such as engineering. I think the competition has definitely gotten much worse, she added, that a 4.2 used to give a student a pretty good shot at UCLA or UC Berkeley. But now those are reach schools, she said. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead, Anika, and then I want to read this last comment. I think a lot of kids in high school are really stressing themselves out to the point it's not good for their mental health, said Melissa Berger, who asked that we use her middle name because acceptances haven't been sent out yet and she doesn't want to jeopardize her chances. But they still do it anyway. They just go ahead and they just stress themselves out. So, Anika,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? I kind of read a lot. I gave a lot of numbers. I want to know, you got a mind over there that's working a million miles a minute, always percolating. So what do you think?
Well, honestly, I don't think much about it. It's just, I mean, for me, it's welcome to the odds of the lottery. Like, don't get knocked off your rocker because you're one of a billion people that's going to get into these spots.
So let me put it this way. How can we take this information and turn a lemonade and lemon, as you want to say? No, lemon into lemonade. I get it wrong. Lemon and I turn a lemon into lemonade. Like how? Because I personally see some good news in this information. It's not bad. This is not a bad news to me. There's some good news in here. What could be the good news in what I just shared?
The good news for me is that I don't know. I feel like that's the good news. It's like, don't be surprised. Like, there's a billion people in the world. Like, I don't give me. I don't know, Mark. What's beyond that?
Well, I think so. Several things. Be realistic. Cast a wider net. And when I say cast a wider net, I don't mean apply to 25 schools.
Right.
I mean apply to schools that have higher acceptance rates and where your academic profile makes you competitive. And another good news is, guess what? Nothing's wrong with you. If you have like 300 slots early at these schools, nothing's wrong with you. Like, there's zillions and zillions of other people in the same situation as you are. And the reason why I really wanted to talk about this, Anika, is it's very common for parents that don't understand how these, remember, it's only 300 to 400 schools that have gotten crazy in selectivity. A lot of schools, we talked about this, are struggling financially. But for these 300 to 400, a lot of times parents don't know how much change has occurred. And they're thinking about it the way they do. So sometimes I'm working with the family and they'll be like, okay, my kid's going to go like ED to Brown, but if they don't get in Brown, they can go to Northeastern. And I'm like, do you know how hard Northeastern has gotten in the last few years? I mean, the same student that just 15 years ago, Northeastern was a slam dunk. It was a complete safety school. No doubt they were getting in. Now it's a reach. Like, it didn't just go to a probable or a possible, okay? It's like a challenge school. That's how much this has changed. We're seeing schools that had 40 and 50% acceptance rates down to 5, 8, 10%. And so parents, if they're not aware of this, they can make statements that can really put pressure on their kids. They're like, well, okay, you might not get into MIT, but you're getting in BU. BU's not easy to get in anymore. And so I want parents to understand this, because when you do, to me, it's emancipating. To me, it can diminish the anxiety and the depression. Kids out there are struggling with confidence. They're struggling with anxiety. They're struggling with depression. They're struggling with suicidal thoughts. And a big part of it, especially in upperly mobile communities, is the college process. And the college process should be fun. It should be rewarding. It should be enjoyable. And one of the best ways to do that is just say, okay, if that's what's happening over there, then guess what? Maybe I'll apply to 1 or 2 schools there, but I don't need to go over there. I'll just cast a wider net to schools that are not crazy in selectivity. And to me, that should be liberating. That should be emancipating. So friends, if you hear my passion, it's because I know as parents you love your kid. And I cannot tell you that it means so much to your child that they make you happy and that you're proud of them. And little subtle things that you can say completely innocently because you mean well can really take a toll on their self-esteem. And I don't want to see that happen, because I see what that's like when I talk with students one-on-one, and I can feel the anguish. Part of it comes from their peer group, especially if you're in a very upscale private school type community or an upscale suburb. but part of it also comes from parents if they feel like they're not meeting your expectations. And most of the time when that happens, it's just innocent. It's just because you don't realize how hard these 300 to 400 schools have gotten to be to get into. And so I'm just saying, pump the brakes, use this knowledge to liberate you so that you can make your child feel completely accepted, whether or not they get into prestige university or not. Okay, friends, if you did not hear part one of the interview last week, So You Want to Be a Doctor, and eventually Dr. David Williams is also going to talk about So You Want to Be a Nurse, I encourage you to go back. I thought it was one of our better conversations. And in part two, my dear friend Dave shares some amazing things as well. He's going to talk about what a student should major in while they're in college if they want to be a doctor. And then he's going to talk about whether it's going to hurt your medical career if you decide not to go to an elite college or elite university. And then he's going to transition and he's going to talk about what a student should be doing right now to test the waters. Or to put it another way, what a student should do to confirm whether being a doctor is right for them. So you don't waste a lot of time and money in med school. And then he'll talk about what character traits it takes to be successful in medicine and in life. And I chime in as well and give my thoughts on that. And then finally, Dave will talk about some of the difference between some of the different medical specialties and what it's like to be a doctor in one field versus another field. So I thought it was a great interview. I encourage you to listen and share your thoughts at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
And along the lines of preparation, obviously, as a doctor, you have to know biology and chemistry and biochemistry, but do you recommend that students major in chemistry or biology or biochemistry, or do you feel other majors are valid paths to being a doc? I mean, I guess you have your own example there, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think that once a person satisfies the basic prerequisites of medicine, that any major that they feel passionate about is a viable pathway to medicine. For the simple reason that if you do what you're passionate about, it's going to make you a more interesting person, and it's going to make you more involved, and it's going to make you more dedicated to your field, and that you will find a way to meld your passion and your fields and your interests within the role of medicine. So to be much more specific, when you get into medicine, you'll find that to get accepted to medical school, they're going to require 2 years of chemistry, including organic chemistry. They're going to require 2 years of biology. They will require probably 1 or maybe 2 years of math, 1 year of physics, and they usually require 1 year of English. Things may have changed, but I don't think that the pre-med requirements are still much more than that. After that, you take the MCATs, and then anything else you do is perfectly valid in terms of you being accepted into medical school, which means you could be an English major and get into medicine. You can be a politics major and get into medicine. You could be a French history major, an African American studies major. And what was said to me back then when I applied, I think is still equally true today. Most medical schools are going to see the vast percentage of their applications dedicated to the biomedical fields. And when they do come across a liberal arts major, it makes you that much more exciting, that much more interesting. You can imagine someone has 1,000 applications, and if only 50 are Renaissance literature history majors, they're going to gravitate to reading those applications far more than the 200th biology major. Does that make sense?
No, that's great. That's great. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Dave, I can imagine we've got a listener out there that's thinking, you've had a successful career, Dave, but you went to Princeton, you went to Harvard, you went to Northwestern. Do you feel a student is hindered from career as a doctor if they don't go to designer colleges or universities?
Absolutely not. I was very privileged because of my parents and their financial abilities to go to these colleges. But whether I had gone to Princeton or I had gone to uh, state school or I'd gone to a Canadian school, I have no doubt that it would not have changed the trajectory of where I am today. And medicine is not like law school. I mean, law school is very much dependent on the schools you go to. I don't think there's any Supreme Court justices that haven't gone to maybe Harvard or Yale. But the fact is that it doesn't matter where you go to medical school. Your medical school degree will get you the same state license. If you do well in that medical school, it's going to get you into the same type of residencies. And once you are trained as either an orthopedic surgeon or a radiologist or an anesthesiologist or an ER doc, you're going to get the same board licensure as people who went to Harvard versus Howard versus osteopathic school. It truly doesn't matter. And this is where your podcast is so relevant. I think it's much more relevant choosing a pathway which minimizes the expenses of both college and medical school. So when you get out of medical school, you don't have this outrageous debt than it is the actual schools that you go to.
Thanks. So let's say there's a student out there, Dave, and they say, you know what, I'm interested in being a doctor, but they're not sure really how to go about confirming that it's the best path for them. Are there any experiences that you recommend a student partake in to get a confirmation that this, that this may be their destiny, their course?
Absolutely. And I think it starts as early as middle school or early high school. One of the most popular ways that students get a sense of medicine and also build a great extracurricular for their college resumes is by shadowing. Many students contact either hospitals or emergency departments or individual physicians, and they have shadowing programs where in the summer you can hook up with a doctor and follow him around. Sometimes you are able to do volunteer type of work in terms of assisting patients getting into wheelchairs, going down to their various appointments. Some shadowing programs allow a little bit more responsibility where you might even assist the doctor in a couple of procedures. But shadowing and actually spending time in a clinic or a hospital one-on-one with a doctor is an excellent opportunity to actually get firsthand experience to the things that a doctor does. That's number one. Number two is research. This is something that my daughter did for the last 2 years, and I thought it was tremendously helpful. One huge aspect of medicine is research, cancer research, heart disease research, orthopedic research. And there are many, many specific research programs designed that high school students can apply to, some of them in which they even get paid for the summer, where they can do firsthand either bench or field research, learning about lab techniques and other protocols for different diseases. And that introduces the student to the academic pathway of medicine, to the research pathway. And that's excellent. And then thirdly, there are international opportunities to be involved in healthcare projects, whether it be famine relief or it can be the delivery of certain, like in Africa, there was one program talking about malaria and the distribution of malaria nets, etc. Those have grown so popular in the last 10 years that I know a lot of college admission officers have actually found them somewhat in disfavor because there's a lot of kids who can do that and spend a lot of money and have means. And so those are less popular among college admission counselors right now as an avenue. But still, if you have the opportunity to go on a mission like I did and to be involved in a hospital or in some type of medical relief at a third world country, I think that's also an awesome opportunity.
So Dave, talk to us about character traits. So are there any essential qualities or just qualities that you feel align themselves well with somebody being a doc?
Okay. Yes. My daughter is right beside me, and she used to take Taekwondo. And I'm going to ask her right now, what were the 3 things that Master Assad always taught you? Focus, discipline, and dedication. Focus, discipline, and dedication. It sounds corny, but this is where I love the martial arts. Focus, discipline, dedication. Focus, discipline, dedication. Those are the character traits that you need to be successful in life and also to be successful in medicine. I was reading several articles that actually said that doctors are not the smartest people. They are not, statistically. And you can find a whole lot of smarter people in other fields, probably all those hedge fund managers. But what you really need to get through 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school and 3 to 10 years of residency is focus, is discipline, and dedication. We have a term for that now. We call it grit. There's a lot of other terms, but those are the character traits. It takes a lot to actually sit down and have a focus that takes you through a 12-year plan. That's what you need. But I think underlying all that is that you have to love the process, and you have to have a sense that this is where you want to be. It has to be connected with a sense of well-being and passion, or else you're going to burn out on that journey.
So I want to add one, Dave. I'm not the doctor, but this is my lay perspective. And I think that empathy and, some people call it bedside manners or whatever, but the ability to sort of that pathos to sort of feel somebody's pain and show compassion. I know that really resonates with in my family, like when it comes to going to a doctor and feedback when we move, and it's always, wow, that person cared about me. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, for certain fields, and this is where if you're going to be a family practitioner,
you're emergency medicine,
yeah,
so it's a little different. You're for you, isn't it?
Yes, and the reason is because I have my wife right here, and so she's the agent of truth. So she'll the first to say that empathy and compassion are important, but we have it in various degrees. And they do tend to correlate with the type of fields that doctors go into. For example, most neurosurgeons, cardiac surgeons, they aren't heavy on the empathy side. They're just not, because they're in such a technical field that requires so much focus on technique, 10 years plus, and that their interactions with the patients on a personal level are so limited. They might come into a patient's room and speak for them for 5 minutes, and then go in and have a surgery that will last for the next 15 hours. But the patient is so you don't need empathy in that situation. However, if you're an oncologist, if you're a family practitioner, if you're a pediatrician, if you're an OBGYN, absolutely you need empathy. So the fact is that when you get people coming through medical school, some doctors have a lot of empathy, and other doctors have absolutely none. And ER doctors are a mixed bag, and and that's where it's much more important in terms of when you get to the residency. That's a much more important characteristic. For example, if you're a radiologist and you spend all day reading films, your empathy potential is probably zero. But interestingly, here's a great.
But like an allergist, like even something like an allergist, something. Sure, you want them to give you a correct diagnosis, but if you sense that they, they can relate to what you're going through with your itchy, watering eyes, and you can't drive, and you're taking days off work. I'm just giving you my experience, but I absolutely, completely appreciate you making that. That differentiation. I think that's really important. It does vary.
And
if I need a cardiologist, I want someone that's good.
Absolutely.
let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 56 is a book I just read in the last month, and I loved it. The book is called Excellent Sheep, and the subtitle is The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life. Now, I'll warn you, the book starts out very negative in a lot of different ways. So you can only take it in small doses initially. Nevertheless, very thought-provoking and definitely worth reading. And it does get more positive as you move through the book. The book talks about mental health struggles that so many college students are experiencing when they are no longer at the top of their class and they have to deal with that. It talks about the pressure students at elite colleges feel to select a profession that will be respected by their peers, like financing or consulting. And I've seen this actually happen to a lot of my students. They might have gone in wanting to be in education, wanting to go into the medical profession or something, and they've been redirected. And then oftentimes when they're in their mid and late 20s or early 30s, they're not happy. And so I have seen that. It talks about the pressure parents put on kids to excel and how this is even more prevalent with high achievers. And it talks about really how there's no difference between sort of the laissez-faire parent and the tiger mom when it comes to how they hinder their child's independence for growth and how they view their child as an extension of themselves. The book also has a powerful quote, which I like. It says, children are no longer valued, but valuable, meaning seen as assets to deliver almost an ROI into the family finances. The book talks about the corporatization of education and how learning is being compromised in order to bring revenue into the coffers of the school. The book decries sacrificing quality teaching for research. And it talks about how colleges inflate their selectivity by recruiting to reject so they'll appear more selective. And it talks about how the most important thing colleges can do is develop critical thinkers who really know how to engage in what the book calls skeptical reflection. It passionately advocates for the liberal arts, which the author says prepares students to handle complexity, tackle ambiguity, and think creatively. So I loved this book, and I really want to recommend it to you as a great thought-provoking read. We will now return to part 2 of my interview with my lifelong friend, Dr. David Williams.
Here's a field that was totally transformed by the concept of empathy, and that's OBGYN. When my father was training, and even when I started the field, 80 to 90% of OBGYNs were men. And now we look back, and guess what? In terms of the female experience, those men had no empathy. And we knew it because in the 1970s, do you know what the highest compensated field was, residency was in medicine? It was OBGYN. And it was because of hysterectomies, because the most highly compensated procedure was hysterectomies. And after a woman had 4 or 5 kids, or if a woman had any fibroids or any sense of problems that would exist after her childbearing age, it was routine to take out her uterus. It was men making those decisions. They weren't thinking about the female perspective. They weren't thinking about the effect on the hormones. Their empathy level was 0. But by time I got to medical school, it was in the midst of a fundamental change. And when I got there, it was like 50-50 OBGYN, male, female. And now I would say going into residency, about 80% to 90% of the field is female. And it's radically changed. For one, hysterectomies, the amount of hysterectomies has decreased by 90% because they're only going to do it if they need it or for totally different conditions. And number 2, the vast majority of females prefer a female OBGYN for the simple reason that historically they have found that most male OBGYNs were not as empathetic to their personal needs. So
that's great.
So the fact is, what you're saying is absolutely correct, but there are a lot of males like me who were a little short on the empathy department in some of the ways that we interacted with people, and we chose fields accordingly. So I would never go into OBGYN, and for me, I probably wouldn't go into family practice and so forth. But for my personality, emergency medicine was fantastic. I was in there for 12 hours. It was high powered. I got to treat people, and then at the end of the day, I left, and I never saw those people again for the most part.
Well, let's talk about that, Dave, because I remember having conversations with you, and I remember one reason you chose emergency medicine was you wanted a life outside of being a doctor, and you wanted standard shift work. And,
absolutely.
One of my clients last year was an OBGYN, and she was like, Mark, hey, I could be at Christmas dinner. If the baby's about to come, I got to go, you know? And so what are other opportunities for you to be a doctor with sort of a set, regimen? Is dermatology one?
Dermatology is fantastic. Dermatology is one, but dermatology was two things about dermatology. It's always been incredibly popular, and the number of entrants into its field has kept its residencies very, very small. So to get into dermatology from residency, you have to be like the top of your class. Many times they require a PhD. And when you get out, you're popping pimples. And I'm not being facetious. There is a show right now, Dr. Pimple Popper. And this lady popped a pimple. And you know what? I can pop the same pimple. I do pop the same pimple. The only problem is I get $50 for popping a pimple. She gets $2,000 for popping a pimple. That's dermatology. but
I'm sure there'd be some pushback from some passionate dermatologists about skin cancer and other things. But
look, anybody can do a punch biopsy, but I'm being facetious to some point. But it's true. I mean, the reality is, I remember when I was doing an ophthalmology rotation and I was with a retinal specialist, and he says, the wonderful thing about being a specialist in ophthalmology is the less you do, the more you get paid. So
wow, that's crazy.
It is. But on a more serious level, we were talking about lifestyle. And I do think lifestyle is very important, because one of the major differences of medical fields is lifestyle. It's very hard to have a lifestyle being a cardiac surgeon or a neurosurgeon. It's quite difficult to have a lifestyle 9 to 5, weekends off, controlling your schedule if you're an obstetrician, obviously. They've changed that because now many obstetricians work in groups, and if you're off, you have your partner covering. But nevertheless, it's not a 9 to 5 job. However, there are other jobs that are completely 9 to 5.
Such as?
Emergency medicine. It's literally shift work. You can choose to do 8-hour shifts, 9-hour shifts, 10-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts. You can choose to do night shifts or day shifts, not to work weekends. You can choose to do just one shift a week. You can choose to do 6 shifts a week or 7 shifts a week. It is completely flexible based on what you desire out of the field, which is why, interestingly enough, over 50% of new entrants into emergency medicine are female, because many females like the flexibility they have to accommodate both childbearing, different stages. They can start off strong, and then when they have children and they want to be more of a child rearer, they can cut down to 2 or 3 shifts a month. And when their kids go to college, they're back to full gear again, or not, depending. Another residency very much like that. Another specialty is radiology. Radiology is so amazing that the technology is such that many of the hospitals I work, the films are read in Australia. And you know why they're read in Australia, Mark?
Cheaper?
It is cheaper, but there's also another fundamental reason. I work predominantly night shifts. And in Australia,
time zone.
It's a time zone. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what happens in the hospital I'm working now is we have a radiologist that reads from 7A to 7P during the day shift, but then come 7 p.m., we switch to a teleradiology group in Australia. And even though it's a night shift for me, it's a day shift for them. So that way they
Makes
can
sense.
have a radiology group where they're only reading on the day shift, and you don't have to be reading films at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's amazing. That's the ultimate shift work. So radiology is one. Dermatology is another. Family practice very much can be 9 to 5, pediatrics as well. So the great advice I was given also when choosing residency is find out everything else that matters in your life and make sure that the field you choose accommodates that. Here's another great example. There's a very good gentleman I know who is the new Pentecostal minister of one of the biggest apostolic churches in Chicago. He's a pediatrician. And he said, one of the reasons I chose pediatrics was it would enable me to continue my work in the ministry. So he can literally he works 4 days a week. And then on the weekends and on certain of the hours of the week, he can also run his church. So those are just some of the ways in which these fields can accommodate the other things that are really important to you. It's not that he doesn't love medicine, but he says, I love the Lord more and I love the church more. And my medical practice has to be secondary to my real flock, which is my church. On the other, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. On the other spectrum, it's very, very hard to have much of a life if you are a pediatric neurosurgeon or if you are a cardiac surgeon, because the technical demands of that field are so great. And the time it takes to develop those skill sets, these are 10-year residencies. So after medical school, you are training for 10 years, often 80 to 100 hours a week in the hospital, honing your skill set. It's hard to imagine you becoming a concert pianist in your spare time while you're maintaining your abilities to be top of your field cardiac surgeon or neurosurgeon. So the great thing that you have to do is choose what it is that you truly love that accommodates everything else that you love in your life.
Just out of curiosity, like anesthesiology and urology and some of these fields, ophthalmology, where do they fit in on the having a life versus being responsive to whatever the demands are?
Well, this is where it depends, and any answer that I give you now could be completely irrelevant in 10 years' time. So let's deal with anesthesiology. My wife is one of the smartest people I know. My daughter's
one reason you married her.
She is a cardiac anesthesiologist. What that means is after 4 years of anesthesiology, she also did a year fellowship in cardiac anesthesia. So she's the type of person that when you're going in for your heart surgery to have your vessels repaired or have your heart transplant or your valves replaced, she's the one that puts you to sleep and brings you back awake during that stressful situation. Her field has had tremendous changes just in the time that she graduated. When she graduated, only anesthesiologists, for the most part, were in the operating room in charge of those surgical procedures. But at the same time, because of the shortage of anesthesiologists, they allowed nurse anesthetists to first come into the field and then play a greater and greater role within that field. So now I think that in many states and cities, there are actually more nurse anesthetists than there are anesthesiologists supervising these fields. And the result has been very significant, both in terms of anesthesiologists' job opportunities, they've gone down significantly, and their compensation, they've also gone down significantly. Now, anesthesiology is still a very popular residency and is still a well-compensated field, but it's nothing like it was when my wife was just graduating as an anesthesiologist. And if trends continue, the salaries of nurse anesthetists and anesthesiologists will continue to compress and nearly be at par. So while anesthesiology used to be a field where in Chicago you can walk into any given hospital and have multiple job opportunities, now it's hard to get a job in Chicago as an anesthesiologist, much easier to get a job as a nurse anesthetist, and your compensation is significantly impacted by the role that nurse anesthetists are now playing.
Next week in the news, new front in college admissions, nudging students to apply early. We'll be in chapter 57 of 171 Answers, and we're discussing how students can showcase their passions in the application process. And next week's question is from a listener who wants to learn more about open enrollment at four-year colleges. And get ready for part 3 of Mark's interview with Dr. David Williams. So you want to be a doctor or a nurse? What you need to know. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.